Cal Renneth stared at his reflection in the small metallic mirror of his dorm pod aboard the Helios ring. The orbital academy hung like a silver halo around the blue and gold gas giant Varian 3, and today the academy felt unusually heavy with anticipation. Or maybe that was just his nerves. He tugged at his uniform collar, feeling the edges of the sleek synthetic fabric bite lightly at his neck. He took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. He had been joking around with his friends last night when he learned that a few cadets, mostly upper-class pranksters, had signed him up for the Academy's compatibility date program. It wasn't supposed to be a real date, at least according to them. "They'll laugh when they see you," one of the cadets had said, a smug smile twisting his face. "You'll be the punchline." Cal had felt the surge of embarrassment, then frustration, then something quieter, a stubborn thought that had anchored itself firmly in his mind. "I'm not going to make it a joke for them." He ran a hand through his hair, thinking about Lyra Vance, the student he was paired with. From what he had seen in the academy directory, she was quiet but brilliant, an expert in xenolinguistics, the study of alien communication. Cal had also learned something else. She was deaf. But Cal didn't see that as a problem. If anything, he felt a strange sort of excitement at the idea of meeting someone whose perspective was so different from his own. He took another deep breath and reminded himself, respect first, humor second, if it came naturally, pride last. He adjusted the small communicator on his wrist, checking that the Academy's sign language interface was working. It was a small device, only slightly larger than a standard wristwatch, but it could translate basic sign language into text or synthesized speech. It wouldn't do the thinking for him, but it would help him communicate. He walked through the dorm corridor, the metallic floor humming beneath his boots. The academy was alive with movement, cadets rushing from lab to lab, technicians repairing drones, and engineers carrying toolkits down the curved halls. Every so often, Cal caught sight of someone glancing at him with a smirk or a whispered laugh, and he ignored it. This wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about doing his best. The meeting point was in the Academy's observation lounge, a wide, open space with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the swirling gases of Varian 3. Holographic displays floated above the polished floor, showing data about orbit trajectories, weather patterns, and the occasional student schedule. Cal arrived early, scanning the room with careful eyes. He wasn't the first to arrive. Lyra Vance was already there, sitting alone near the windows. Her posture was straight but relaxed, one hand resting lightly on the arm of the chair while the other fingers tapped rhythmically on a small tablet. She didn't glance up immediately, her focus clearly elsewhere, as if she were reading some invisible text in the air. Cal's heart thumped harder than he expected. It was strange to feel nervous, considering he had faced far more dangerous challenges in the Academy's training simulations. But this was different. He took a small step forward, then another, until he was standing just a few feet away. Lyra finally noticed him, tilting her head slightly. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, the kind that missed nothing. And then she signed, her hands moving with a fluid grace that Cal could recognize even without the translator. "So, you knew you were the prank?" Cal froze for a moment, surprised at how direct she was. Then he nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and anxiety. He raised his hands slowly and signed back as best he could, the wrist communicator confirming his movements. "I didn't know at first, but I realized it on the way here, and I decided to come anyway. You deserve better than a joke." For a long moment, Lyra studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh, it wasn't mocking, it was warm, and it carried a kind of sharp amusement that made Cal relax more than he expected. "Good," she signed, "because I don't like being used." Cal smiled, He had expected tension, maybe awkward silence, but instead he felt the first spark of a real connection. Lyra wasn't just a participant in a prank. She was a person, strong and confident, someone who demanded respect, and he was ready to give it. The conversation began cautiously. Cal asked simple questions about her studies, her interests, and her favorite parts of the academy. She responded through signs, which Cal read, and sometimes through the wrist translator when she wanted him to speak aloud. He was careful, paying attention not just to the words but to the rhythm of her hands, the tilt of her head, the subtle expressions that conveyed more than language could. As they spoke, he realized something important. Lyra had a remarkable way of noticing patterns in everything. She talked about the languages of alien species in the outer colonies, how gestures, body movements, and even color changes could convey messages across vast distances where sound could not travel. Cal found himself genuinely fascinated, forgetting entirely the prank that had brought them together. At one point, Lyra paused, watching the gas giant swirl below the station. Her hand hovered in the air as she signed a question. "Do you ever think humans are too small to matter?" Cal considered the question carefully. He looked down at the planet, the storm clouds spinning like painted ribbons. "Maybe," he signed back slowly, "but small things can do big things too." "We adapt, we learn, we survive." She smiled faintly, as if she had been expecting a different answer and found his satisfactory. "Good. I like that." The first hour passed quickly, filled with conversation, curiosity, and the quiet hum of the station around them. For every joke the pranksters had intended, there was a counterweight of genuine interest and respect. Cal found himself laughing naturally at a few clever remarks Lyra made, not at her, not at the situation, but with her. As the observation lounge's lights dimmed slightly for a scheduled orbit simulation, Cal realized he had forgotten to check the time. He was supposed to report to a systems lab in less than 20 minutes. He glanced at Lyra, uncertain whether to leave or stay longer. She noticed his hesitation and signed slowly. "You can go, but I'd like to continue this sometime. Not as a joke, as a choice." Cal's chest lifted. He nodded quickly, trying not to seem too eager. "I'd like that too." When he left the lounge, he felt lighter than he had in weeks. The prank had been real, yes, but it had also led to something unexpected. And for the first time in a long while, Cal felt proud. Not because he had survived a prank, but because he had treated someone with care, honesty, and respect. The academy corridors felt different now, almost welcoming. He passed other cadets, some whispering, some glancing with curiosity, but none daring to mock him openly. Maybe they sensed something he couldn't see. That humor and courage, when paired with integrity, carried more weight than ridicule. By the time he reached his lab, Cal's mind had already shifted to the next challenge, the day's engineering simulations, which were notoriously difficult. Yet a small smile remained, a quiet confidence born not from the prank itself, but from how he had handled it. Somewhere in the lounge, Lyra continued her work, her hands moving over her tablet with careful precision. She, too, seemed unaffected by the prank, focused instead on curiosity, learning, and the unexpected connection that had begun today. Two paths had crossed in a moment meant to embarrass, but instead, they had begun something far more promising. And aboard the Helios ring, spinning silently around Varian 3, the stars seemed just a little brighter, not because the prank had failed, but because humanity had found a way to turn even a joke into an opportunity for courage, respect, and connection. Cal Renneth could still feel the echo of Lyra's laughter in his mind as he walked down the polished hallways of the Helios ring. The station spun silently around the gas giant Varian 3, its massive observation windows reflecting the golden light of the planet below. Normally, he would have felt the weight of embarrassment from the prank. Instead, he felt curious. Curiosity was a dangerous feeling for someone like Cal, who had spent the last 2 years surviving the Academy's toughest simulations. He had learned to control his emotions, to predict the unpredictable, and to stay calm under pressure. But curiosity, real, human curiosity, was something else. It made him think about Lyra Vance, her sharp eyes, the grace of her movements, the way she had laughed with understanding rather than mockery. He returned to his dorm to grab a notebook and a small set of portable equipment he sometimes carried for field research. Today, he wanted to be prepared, not just for the next date session, but for understanding someone whose world was different from his own. When he arrived at the lounge again, Lyra was already there. She had moved slightly closer to the windows, her tablet resting on her lap. She signed something almost immediately as she looked up at him. "You came back." Cal nodded and smiled. "Yes, I wanted to learn more." Her eyes flicked to him, studying him closely. Then she signed with a slow, deliberate rhythm. "Most people don't care to understand. They only laugh." Cal's smile didn't falter. "I don't want to be most people." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft hum of the station and the distant whirring of life support systems. Then Lyra tilted her head slightly and signed again. "Good. Then we can start. You must know. Communication is more than words." Cal leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "Tell me more." She gestured to the space outside the windows, where the gases of Varian 3 swirled like liquid fire. "See that? Humans think communication needs sound. But the world, our world, the galaxy, is full of patterns, movements, gestures, vibrations, signals you don't hear. Understanding comes when you notice the subtle things." Cal nodded slowly. He could feel the truth in her words. In the simulations, he had learned that the smallest change in a system could create massive consequences. Perhaps communication worked the same way. "Do you practice this often?" he asked, pointing to her hands and tablet. Lyra's fingers danced in the air. "Always. Patterns help me understand, even when I cannot hear. I notice rhythms, flows, the smallest change in light or motion. It tells me more than words sometimes." Cal found himself captivated. He had studied advanced engineering, learned the language of machines, but here was someone studying the language of life itself, how beings, human or alien, conveyed meaning. And she was extraordinary at it. Their conversation flowed naturally, filled with questions and answers. Cal asked about alien languages, unusual communication systems, even the most complex codes she had deciphered. Lyra shared, carefully, showing him diagrams on her tablet, explaining how gestures and signs could create complex meaning. At one point, she paused, looking thoughtful. "Tell me, do you think humans are too small to matter? Among the stars?" Cal considered her question carefully. It wasn't easy. Most people would have brushed it off, saying something cliché. But he had faced countless scenarios where humans seemed insignificant, against the forces of space, the scale of the universe, the unknown dangers. "Maybe," he signed slowly, "but small things can do big things too. We adapt, we learn, we survive. Even in space, humans find a way." Lyra studied him, her gaze intense. Then she signed one word: "Good." It was more than a word. It was approval, recognition, respect. Cal felt a thrill of satisfaction. Here was someone who didn't laugh at him, didn't try to humiliate him, but instead judged him by his mind and heart. They continued exploring ideas, moving from language to philosophy, from human ingenuity to the possibilities of alien cultures. Time seemed to bend. The usual academy chatter faded into the background. Cadets passed by, whispering, but their voices felt distant, unimportant. Then a sharp alarm echoed through the station. Red lights flashed across the observation lounge, bathing the metallic floor in an urgent glow. Cal jumped to his feet and Lyra's eyes widened. She signed quickly, "Solar flare! Core shields!" Cal cursed under his breath. The Academy had prepared for solar flares, but they rarely happened. The last time the outer modules had been struck, engineers spent weeks repairing the damage. "Stay calm," he signed back, though part of him was already moving toward the emergency panel. Lyra followed closely, her tablet now displaying emergency schematics. The station trembled slightly as a solar flare slammed into Varian 3's magnetic field. Lights flickered, and some systems went offline. Cal's mind raced. "We need to stabilize the auxiliary shields, now." Lyra nodded, her hands moving quickly. She was coordinating with the wrist translator, but it failed intermittently under the electromagnetic interference from the flare. Without the interface, she relied on her own sense of patterns, the vibrations beneath her feet, and the faint hum of emergency systems. Cal took her hand, guiding her to the panel. "Follow my hands. I'll tell you what to do." They worked together in silence, moving quickly, hands brushing against the cold metal of the console. Cal adjusted levers, pressed panels, and interpreted the flickering readouts. Lyra matched his movements, tapping and swiping on her tablet with precision, improvising signals with her fingers. Other cadets scrambled around them, panicking. Some froze. Some tried to help but didn't know the systems. Cal realized then that their partnership was perfect because they had learned to trust each other instantly. Where others faltered, they adapted. Minutes passed like hours. The flare intensified. Panels sparked. The observation windows glowed red with the reflection of the gas giant below. Cal's hands were steady, Lyra's focus unbroken. Together, they manually rerouted power, reactivated auxiliary shields, and stabilized the station. Finally, the alarms died down. The lights returned to normal. The hum of the Helios ring's life support systems was steady again. Cadets around them looked stunned, some whispering, others cheering softly. Cal exhaled deeply, letting his tension fade. He turned to Lyra, expecting fatigue on her face. Instead, she smiled, a small, quiet smile. "We did it," she signed. Cal nodded, still holding her hand. "We did." The moment wasn't just victory over the solar flare. It was proof of something else: human ingenuity, adaptability, and courage. The prank that had begun the day now felt trivial compared to what they had accomplished together. In the aftermath, the pranksters who had arranged the date looked on with disbelief. Their laughter had died in their throats, replaced by awe. Cal and Lyra had turned a joke into triumph, not just surviving a situation, but solving a life-threatening crisis that no one else could manage. Later, as the station stabilized fully and engineers began repairs, Cal walked with Lyra back to the observation lounge. Outside, the gas giant spun silently, its storms calm once more. The stars stretched infinitely beyond the viewports, indifferent yet beautiful. "You handled that well," Lyra signed quietly. "Better than most." Cal shook his head. "We handled it together." Lyra's eyes softened. There was no teasing now, no joke, only respect, understanding, and a shared sense of achievement. They sat near the windows, looking out at the swirling clouds of Varian 3. Around them, cadets were slowly returning to routine, but Cal and Lyra remained in their quiet bubble, sharing ideas, discussing the station systems, and slowly learning about each other. Cal realized something important. The prank didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the trust they had built, the teamwork that had saved the station, and the quiet understanding that had grown between them. Humor could be cruel, yes, but humans had a way of turning even a cruel joke into an opportunity for courage, creativity, and connection. For the first time since he arrived at the Helios ring, Cal felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. And when he glanced at Lyra, who was tapping a pattern on her tablet to record the emergency response, he knew the next part of their story, whatever it would be worth facing together. The Helios ring had returned to a quiet hum, but the calm was deceptive. Cal Renneth walked alongside Lyra Vance through the main corridor, checking every panel, every system status display. Though the emergency was over, the flare had exposed weaknesses in the station's shielding and circuitry. Engineers were already preparing for repairs, but something in Cal's mind told him it wasn't over yet. "Something feels off," he signed to Lyra as they moved. She glanced at him, her dark eyes sharp. "I noticed, too. The shield readings, they spiked unusually before the flare, almost like it wasn't natural." Cal frowned. "Sabotage?" he signed, keeping his tone calm but urgent. Lyra's eyes narrowed. She tapped her tablet quickly, scrolling through archived sensor logs. "It's possible. But who would, and why?" Before he could answer, the lights flickered violently, then went out completely. The hum of life support systems persisted, but the emergency lights failed to engage immediately. The station had been designed for partial power loss, but nothing prepared anyone for total darkness. Cal's stomach tightened. Darkness on a space station was more dangerous than a fire on Earth. It disoriented, cut off communication, and amplified every small mistake. He reached for Lyra's hand instinctively. "Stay close. We'll find the auxiliary panels." Lyra nodded, squeezing his hand. Without her tactile interface working, she would rely on touch, vibrations, and her trained instincts. Cal guided her carefully down the corridor, feeling the grooves in the floor under his boots, the subtle shifts of air currents from ventilation shafts. They weren't alone. Cadets stumbled through the hallways, panicked whispers filling the dark. Some tried to help, but the chaos only made things worse. Cal realized quickly that leadership was required, not just for them, but for anyone nearby. "Follow us," he called aloud, hoping the sound would carry. Lyra repeated his gestures for those who could see them, and soon a small group of cadets trailed behind. Cal led them toward the Auxiliary Engineering Corps. The station's map projected faintly in his wrist device, allowing him to navigate. But the further they went, the worse the situation became. Panels were sparking. Small fires ignited near overloaded circuits. The station's orbit had stabilized after the flare, but without power, life support systems in peripheral areas were beginning to fail. Lyra's hands moved constantly, brushing over walls, checking pulses of vibrations, reading the environment through what Cal could only describe as her sixth sense. He felt admiration and a deep reliance on her skills. If he had been confident in her abilities before, he now knew she was indispensable. A sudden shudder ran through the corridor, making the group stumble. Cal steadied Lyra and the others. "Brace yourselves!" The shudder was followed by a deep, low hum, a warning vibration through the station's metal bones. Something massive had shifted outside, perhaps debris from the gas giant's upper atmosphere, or worse. Cal made a quick decision. "Auxiliary panel this way. Everyone stay in line." He signed and motioned with his hands. Lyra repeated the signs for those behind him. The group moved in tight formation, guided by the combined strength of Cal's leadership and Lyra's awareness. Every footstep mattered. A misstep could send someone tumbling into open maintenance shafts. Sparks from the walls lit their faces in sudden, brief flashes. When they finally reached the auxiliary core, the situation was worse than Cal had expected. The main control console was offline, auxiliary systems barely functioning, and emergency lights still dead. He had to reroute power manually, a risky procedure that required precise timing and coordination. Cal took a deep breath. "I'll do the rerouting. Lyra, guide me with taps. Tell me which switches, in what order." Lyra's fingers hovered over his hand. "Understood. I'll communicate through rhythm. Trust me." The two moved as one. Cal's hands flew across panels, adjusting circuits, rerouting energy lines, manually engaging backup systems. Lyra's fingers tapped against his arm and shoulder, each sequence representing a command. Left tap, right tap, double tap, a code they improvised in real time. The other cadets watched, unsure how to help. Some tried to hand tools, but Cal shook his head. There wasn't time for mistakes. Every second mattered. The station's orbit could shift dangerously if the auxiliary shields failed completely. Cal's mind worked with surgical precision. He recalled every simulation, every emergency drill. But simulations had never included the unpredictability of human error, nor the subtle genius of Lyra's pattern recognition guiding him. Time seemed to stretch. Sparks flew. Small alarms blared in his earpiece as systems flickered on and off. Lyra's eyes were focused, her expression calm despite the chaos. Cal marveled at her composure. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Cal engaged the last switch. He felt the station shudder gently, then settle. Lights returned, faint at first, then fully. Emergency systems hummed at full power. The auxiliary shields stabilized. They had done it, together. Cadets around them erupted into cheers, though many were still shaken. Cal looked at Lyra, expecting relief, maybe even exhaustion, but her smile was quiet, composed, full of something that resembled pride. "We did it," she signed. Cal nodded. "Yes, together." For a moment, the prank, the embarrassment, the laughter of the upper-class cadets, all of it seemed insignificant. They had faced a crisis far greater than a joke, and they had succeeded through courage, quick thinking, and partnership. But Cal couldn't ignore the nagging thought at the back of his mind. This wasn't just a random solar flare. The spike in the shield readings before the event suggested deliberate interference. Someone had intended to destabilize the station. He turned to Lyra. "This wasn't an accident. The flare, the readings, they weren't natural." Lyra's eyes darkened. "Sabotage. Someone wants us in danger. Maybe not all of us, but certain targets." Cal clenched his fists. They had survived this crisis, but the real challenge was only beginning. Whoever had done this would likely strike again. He realized now that the prank that started the day might be connected in ways they didn't yet understand. For now, though, survival and recovery came first. Cal and Lyra began helping cadets check systems, guide injured students, and stabilize minor fires. Their leadership was natural. The team trusted them because they had proven themselves in action, not words. As they worked, Cal noticed a shift in the cadets who had once mocked him. Their laughter was gone, replaced by quiet respect, curiosity, even awe. A prank that had been intended to humiliate had instead revealed competence, courage, and humanity at its best. After the chaos had been managed and the station stabilized, Cal and Lyra finally paused. They leaned against the auxiliary panel, breathing hard, but feeling the satisfaction of a job well done. Outside, the gas giant swirled silently, oblivious to the lives saved in its orbit. Cal looked at Lyra. Her hands were steady now, her fingers moving lightly over her tablet as she recorded system data. She looked up, catching his gaze. "We made it," she signed softly. Cal smiled. "Yes, we did. And we'll figure out who did this next." She nodded, the hint of a grin returning. There was no mockery in her expression, only the quiet determination that had guided them through darkness. Together, they walked back to the observation lounge. The stars stretched infinitely outside the massive windows, indifferent yet magnificent. Cal realized that this was why humans mattered, not because they were the largest or the strongest, but because they could adapt, think, and act in moments of crisis. The prank that had begun their day now seemed almost insignificant. They had faced something far greater than embarrassment and had survived through intelligence, courage, and teamwork. Humanity had shown its best in the darkness, and Cal felt a deep sense of pride, not just in himself, but in the people around him, and in Lyra, whose skills and courage had made the impossible possible. For the first time since the day began, Cal felt a quiet confidence in the future. Whoever had attempted to harm the station might strike again, but he and Lyra would be ready. Together, they had turned fear into action, chaos into order, and a joke into a story of courage. And aboard the Helios ring, spinning silently around Varian 3, Cal knew that humanity's spirit, resilient, clever, and brave, would always shine, even in the darkest moments. The Helios ring had returned to a deceptive calm. Lights were steady, alarms silent, and most cadets were tending to minor repairs or catching their breath. Yet for Cal Renneth and Lyra Vance, the tension had only shifted, not disappeared. The earlier crisis had revealed a troubling truth. The solar flare had not been entirely natural. Cal paced near the auxiliary engineering core, his fingers tapping lightly on a panel. "We can't assume it was an accident," he signed to Lyra. "Something, or someone, wanted the station in trouble." Lyra studied the system readouts carefully, her fingers moving over the tablet with the fluid precision he had come to admire. "I agree. The shielding was weakened in a pattern that matches deliberate interference. The timing of the flare, too perfect." Cal exhaled slowly. The prank that had begun their day now felt trivial compared to this realization. The academy wasn't just a place of study. It could be dangerous, even deadly, if someone decided to manipulate the environment. He turned to Lyra, determination in his eyes. "Then we prepare. If they try again, we'll be ready." Her eyes sparkled faintly. "Yes, but preparation alone is not enough. We need action." That action came sooner than expected. Moments later, a series of system alerts flashed across the engineering panels. A segment of the outer shield had failed. Not a small failure, but a critical one that could destabilize the station's orbit if not fixed immediately. Cal's stomach tightened. He had handled minor crises before, even dangerous ones, but this was more complex. It required precise timing, coordination, and a clear plan. "Lyra," he signed quickly. "We'll have to reroute the primary power manually. I can do it, but I'll need you for guidance. Your awareness is faster than any system." She nodded, setting her tablet down. "Understood. Let's begin." The station's corridors were crowded with cadets attempting to help, but confusion reigned. Many didn't know the auxiliary systems as well as Cal did, and panic could spread fast. Cal raised his hands, signaling everyone to clear a path. Lyra repeated the gestures for the cadets behind him. Together they moved toward the central power conduit. When they reached the panels, the situation became immediately clear. Manual rerouting required multiple steps, precise timing, and constant monitoring. One wrong move could overload circuits or disable life support systems. Cal adjusted a lever, feeling the slight vibration through the floor, and watched the flickering readouts. "Lyra, signal me when the secondary line is stable." Her fingers tapped rapidly against his arm. One tap, then two, then a double tap. Each sequence communicated a system check, a warning, or confirmation. They had developed a language on the spot, a combination of instinct, observation, and improvisation. Minutes stretched as they worked. Sparks occasionally shot from exposed conduits. Panels glowed red, warning of overload. Cadets hovered nearby, unsure whether to step in or back away. Cal didn't hesitate. His hands moved with careful precision. Every adjustment, every switch flip was calculated. Lyra's guidance was invaluable, alerting him to subtle energy shifts, minor misalignments, and hidden risks he might have overlooked. "Now, engage the auxiliary," Lyra tapped urgently. Cal followed the sequence. The auxiliary systems hummed to life. Power flowed steadily to the shields. The red warnings dimmed. Slowly, the station's stability returned. but their work wasn't finished. While one section stabilized, others showed signs of strain. Cal adjusted another set of circuits, rerouting energy through alternate conduits. Lyra guided him with calm precision, sensing patterns and anticipating fluctuations before the panels could register them. A sudden tremor ran through the station. Small debris had struck a maintenance hull near the outer shield. Cal steadied himself, then reached for a critical switch. "Hold the line," he signed to Lyra. Her fingers tapped rapidly. "Ready? Timing is crucial." Cal flipped the switch. Sparks flew briefly, then the energy stabilized. Alarms silenced. The station stopped shuddering. They had succeeded again. The other cadets looked on in awe. The pranksters who had mocked him earlier were speechless, their earlier laughter replaced by quiet respect. Cal realized then that leadership wasn't about position. It was about competence, calm, and action under pressure. Lyra glanced at him. "We did it. The station is secure for now." Cal nodded, breathing heavily. "Yes, but whoever caused this may try again. We need to find out who." They began reviewing system logs, comparing energy fluctuations with access records. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Certain cadets had unauthorized access to critical systems during the last few cycles. Someone had deliberately weakened the shielding to create maximum vulnerability during the flare. Cal frowned. "They're hiding in plain sight. Someone among the cadets, someone we know." Lyra's expression remained calm, but her hands moved with quiet urgency. "We need evidence. Accusations won't help. And if they know we're investigating, they could strike again." Cal agreed. They set to work, scanning the access logs, noting anomalies and cross-referencing with known schedules. Every keystroke, every panel access was a clue. Slowly, the picture became clearer. Hours passed. The station hummed quietly around them, life support systems functioning normally. The hum was reassuring, but Cal and Lyra remained focused. Every detail mattered. Finally, they identified the saboteur, one of the cadets who had initiated the original prank. It wasn't someone random. It was a person who had underestimated them, assuming the joke would go as planned. Cal shook his head. He could have confronted the cadet immediately, but Lyra's calm guidance reminded him of the importance of strategy. "Wait. Gather evidence. Present it properly. Don't let emotion cloud judgment." He nodded, respecting her judgment. Together, they prepared a full report, including system logs, timing anomalies, and proof of deliberate interference. When the Academy officials reviewed it, the saboteur could not deny responsibility. Once the formalities were handled, Cal finally allowed himself to relax. He and Lyra had turned a potentially deadly situation into a display of human skill and ingenuity. Their actions had protected the station, their peers, and perhaps even countless lives. Lyra smiled faintly. Not everyone would have survived. Not everyone would have led like that. Cal shook his head, a small grin forming. "We did it together." The day ended with the station stabilized, cadets returning to their routines and systems functioning better than before. Outside, Varian 3's storms swirled in silent beauty, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and humanity's small but capable place within it. Cal realized that the prank, which had started as an attempt to humiliate him, now seemed almost insignificant. The real test had been survival, leadership, and the ability to act under pressure. He had succeeded, not because he was naturally brilliant, but because he had trusted others, adapted quickly, and relied on human ingenuity. For Lyra, the experience had been a validation of her skills and awareness. For Cal, it was a reminder that even the smallest human could make a difference when courage and intelligence were combined. Together, they had not only saved the station, but shown that humanity could rise to challenges far beyond expectations. As the day ended, They walked back to the observation lounge, quiet for the first time. The stars outside stretched endlessly, indifferent to human struggle, yet beautiful in their constancy. Cal realized that this moment, the calm after crisis, was precious. It was a moment of reflection, of pride, and of planning for the future. The future was uncertain, yes. There would be challenges, dangers, and perhaps more sabotage. But Cal felt ready. With Lyra by his side, he knew that whatever came next, they could face it together. Humanity, he thought, was strongest when it adapted, worked together, and trusted in the best of itself. And aboard the Helios ring, spinning silently in orbit, that spirit was alive, strong, and ready for whatever the universe would throw next. The Helios ring gleamed quietly against the endless backdrop of space, spinning slowly around the golden and blue storms of Varian 3. Inside, the Academy had returned to its routines, but for Cal Reneth and Lyra Vance, the day's events had left marks that were both deep and permanent. The investigation into the solar flare interference had concluded. The saboteur, the same cadet who had orchestrated the original prank, was identified, and the Academy's council was preparing disciplinary action. It had been a difficult process, requiring careful documentation, evidence, and patience. Cal and Lyra had worked together to compile the proof, panel logs, access time stamps, energy fluctuations, all of it telling a clear story of deliberate sabotage. Cal leaned against a console in the observation lounge, watching the patterns of light across the gas giant below. He felt a sense of relief, but also something stronger. Pride. Not pride in himself alone, but pride in what they had accomplished together, and in the resilience of the humans around them. Lyra joined him, her tablet tucked under her arm. She signed softly, "They will be held accountable." That was important. But what we did, that was greater. Cal smiled. Yes, we showed what humans can do when we act together, calmly and wisely. They sat near the massive windows, letting the vastness of space surround them. The events of the day, starting as a joke meant to humiliate him, now felt almost laughable in comparison to what they had survived and accomplished. "Do you think they ever expected us to do all this?" Cal asked aloud. Lyra's fingers danced in the air as she signed, a subtle smile on her face. No, they expected fear, embarrassment, maybe anger. They did not expect courage, intelligence, adaptation. Cal chuckled quietly. Humans surprise even themselves sometimes. The Academy officials arrived soon after, calling both of them to a formal ceremony in the central hall. Cadets and instructors gathered, some whispering, others standing quietly, observing the two who had turned what was meant to be a humiliation into a triumph. The council's chairwoman, a tall, stern figure with silver-streaked hair, addressed the audience. "Today, we recognize two cadets whose actions went far beyond expectation. In the face of crisis, they displayed calm, intelligence, and courage. They did not panic. They did not wait for orders. They acted, saving the station and every life aboard." Cal felt a slight flush of embarrassment as the hall erupted in applause. But Lyra remained calm, her expression composed, her hands resting lightly on her tablet. She had always been understated, but her skill and focus had been undeniable. The chairwoman continued, directing her words at the audience. "Let this be a lesson. Humanity's strength lies not only in technology, but in its people. When we act with intelligence, courage, and trust in one another, there is no challenge too great, no obstacle insurmountable." She turned toward Cal and Lyra specifically. "Cadet Reneth, Cadet Vance, you have demonstrated that spirit. The Academy commends you and will recognize your actions in the official records. Your example will be taught to future cadets as a model of courage, cooperation, and human ingenuity." The applause was louder this time, sustained, reverent. Cadets who had once whispered jokes about Cal now looked at him with new respect. Even the pranksters, standing at the back of the hall, avoided his gaze, knowing their actions had backfired spectacularly. After the formalities, Cal and Lyra returned to the observation lounge, away from the eyes of the audience. The station's hum was comforting, a quiet reminder that their efforts had preserved life, systems, and trust. Lyra signed, "They tried to make us a joke. Instead, we became a lesson." Cal nodded. "Yes, and I think they'll remember it for a long time." For a long while, they sat quietly, reflecting on what had happened. The day had started with embarrassment, laughter, and the cruel intentions of others. It had escalated to danger, crisis, and the threat of catastrophe. And yet, through it all, they had risen to the challenge, demonstrating the best of humanity: adaptability, courage, intelligence, and cooperation. "Do you feel proud?" Lyra asked, her eyes meeting his. Cal hesitated for a moment. Pride had been a complicated feeling for him. It wasn't about ego. It wasn't about winning. It was about recognizing effort, courage, and the impact of their actions. "Yes," he signed. "Proud of what we did, proud of how we acted, and proud of you." Lyra's eyes softened, and she gave a subtle nod. "I am proud, too. Of you. Of us." They spoke for a while longer, sharing ideas, plans, and hopes for future projects. Lyra described her research into alien communication, patterns of language across species, and the potential for human innovation to bridge worlds. Cal shared insights into engineering challenges, simulations, and lessons learned from surviving crises aboard the station. Every word, every sign strengthened the bond between them. What had begun as a prank had transformed into mutual respect, admiration, and partnership. Eventually, the lounge emptied. The station returned to its quiet rhythm. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, silent witnesses to the triumphs of humanity inside. Cal looked at Lyra, and for the first time he felt that perhaps this partnership, born from coincidence, challenge, and perseverance, was something rare, something valuable, something worth nurturing. "So, what now?" he asked. Lyra signed thoughtfully. "Now we continue, we learn, we prepare, and we use what we know to make the station and humanity stronger." Cal smiled. "Agreed. And maybe we turn this story into one they'll never forget." For the first time, the idea of the prank felt distant, almost irrelevant. The story wasn't about embarrassment or ridicule. It was about how humans could rise above challenges, turn crises into triumphs, and demonstrate courage and intelligence in the face of danger. Later that evening, as the station's lights dimmed for rest cycles, Cal and Lyra walked to the observation deck. The gas giant below spun silently, storms swirling like rivers of gold and blue. They leaned against the railing, looking at the patterns of light, thinking of the endless possibilities beyond their station. "Do you think humans will ever stop surprising themselves?" Cal asked, more to the stars than to Lyra. She signed slowly, thoughtfully. "I hope not. That is how we survive. That is how we grow. That is how we matter." Cal nodded. The hum of the station, the silence of space, and the quiet companionship of someone extraordinary beside him made him feel more alive than ever. The Academy might have started the day with a joke, a prank intended to humiliate, but in the end, it had revealed something far more significant: the resilience, intelligence, and courage of humans. And in that realization, Cal felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He turned to Lyra. "Thank you for everything." Her hands moved softly, signing, "No thanks needed. We acted together. That is enough." Cal smiled. Together they had faced danger, uncertainty, and sabotage. Together they had succeeded. and together they had shown, in a small corner of the galaxy, the very best of humanity. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter as they watched, silent witnesses to courage, ingenuity, and connection. The Helios ring continued its orbit, stable and strong, a testament to what humans could do when they worked together. For Cal and Lyra, the day ended not as a joke, but as a triumph. And somewhere deep inside, Cal knew that humanity, small, adaptable, clever, and brave, would continue to shine, even in the darkest reaches of space. And as the station spun silently around the gas giant, one truth was clear: humanity mattered. They had proven it.